Thank you very much, Rufus, and good morning, everybody. A few months ago, we launched our in-depth look at the relationship readers have with their favourite news brands, which we call Truly, Madly, Deeply. What today we're going to do is to recut the data, to actually look, as Rufus says, into how news brands influence their readers across the day, across the week, across moods, needs, and platforms. And what it shows is a relationship that's no longer confined to the commute to and from work or to a quick peek at the headlines of a lunchtime, but is increasingly part of consumers' diverse media portfolio 24/7. Hence the title of today's presentation, Never Let Me Go. Now, just a reminder, this is the scope of the original research. We initially recruited around 50 people nationwide to take part in a series of creative workshops, and we also asked them to fill in a 2-week diary, a media diary, the second week of which we also deprived them of their favourite news brand. We followed that up with an in-depth online survey of 1,000 adults, representative of both readers and non-readers, so we could put some numbers on the insights, many of which we'll be sharing with you today for the first time. And finally, we conducted a dozen in-depth filmed interviews with respondents from across the spectrum. And this is what we found. First of all, we found that news is incredibly important to people. So much so that it actually simultaneously addresses a number of different important need states. Using a combination of research methodologies and statistical techniques, we were able to identify the 6 main need states, which ranged from the rational, being in the know, to the emotional, such as feeling uplifted or relaxation and me time. And from the active, such as fueling conversation, right the way through to the passive, which is the comfort of ritual and routine, or just passing the time. So when we looked at the full range of need states, it was news brands that were consistently best in addressing them, based on that original research. And we found that this leads to a much closer relationship between news brands and their users, one that's in many cases been built up over many years, and is based on 2 powerful drivers, which actually Jason alluded to just now. Trust, but also personal identification. The sense that this brand reflects their own personal values and interests. The research also stressed that the new digital platforms are actually strengthening these relationships as they make content available how, when, and in what format their readers require. Which means, of course, they're available 24/7, they're constantly updated, and they're personalized to produce a more engaging experience. And finally, we found that all of this is working together to create a powerful environment for advertisers. One in which the brand rub, from the news brands to the advertiser brands, works very powerfully at both an implicit and an explicit level. So consequently, many readers turn to their favourite news brands for a variety of reasons, often reflecting the different facets of their multidimensional lifestyles. So whether it's to do better at work, whether it's to catch up on the latest gossip or sports results, understand the news events of the day better, or find inspiration to look after their own or their family's well-being, news brands were the preferred destination, which of course is reflected in the number of different need states those news brands are expected to address. All the different need states we identified are important to sizable proportions of readers. In fact, the average reader expects their news brand to address at least 4 of them. As you might expect, news brands were seen as significantly and consistently better at providing those benefits compared to all the other main media channels. Sometimes TV came second, sometimes social media, but the lead medium was never in doubt. Sometimes one news brand can cover all these need states, but today's readers are willing to look around. The average reader uses 3 to 4 news brands across the average week in order to get the news brand content they require, but at the same time, the bulk of them will have a preferred news brand that they claim to use predominantly. Now, of course, one major contribution to this increasing portfolio of news brands amongst regular readers is down to this unlimited, on-demand access. So almost 7 out of 10 news brand readers say they get their favourite news brand whenever they want it and wherever they want whatever they're doing. And that's compared to less than 3% who disagree, which obviously indicates the huge influence that online and mobile access is having on their levels of engagement and brand loyalty. And of course, it also requires us to map these new behaviours. And for the more digitally enlightened readers, that's actually going to take some doing, because they're already using a variety of platforms in a variety of ways, depending on how their need states change. So let's take Andrew, one of our interviewees, as an example.
The fact that you can read it on a tablet or read it as a paper, or even on the internet on the laptop, because I think I use it in different ways. Probably when I do read it in all different forms, it changes the way in which I look or read the information. The tablet offers me a way of getting quick, instant news, knowing what other people, I guess, are reading as well, because it has top news, and just filtering the whole paper down into a small section, because it goes from sort of news, entertainment to sports, all on one screen, or just about, and you can go up and down. So it's sort of a bite-sized chunk of what the actual paper is. Whereas the paper, I'm really getting probably more breadth of knowledge and more breadth of what the paper is actually about and what articles there are. Then on the internet, when I search on my laptop, it's more what I'm searching for personally, what I want to look at there and then. It's probably more of a detailed search, perhaps. All coming from The Guardian, just 3 different ways of looking at it.
So this is becoming a very complex relationship, one that has ebbs and flows across the day and across the week. So we're going to look at that, starting with the different need states that readers are bringing to that experience across the average day. So going through the need states from least to most important, we can see that the need to feel uplifted peaks in the morning but gradually tails off during the day. The need for relaxation or me time actually is the opposite to that, increases throughout the day, so it's almost 3 times the size in terms of importance in the evening, late evening, compared to the early morning. The need to pass the time actually peaks in the middle of the day, possibly between the many tasks and chores that we're faced with during those times. Whereas the importance of news in terms of fueling conversation starts off with a bang in the morning, but becomes far less important throughout the day, probably as we get tired of all that chatter and actually just fancy a little bit of me time. The comfort of ritual and routine really does peak even higher first thing and then declines at a similar pace. The data would suggest that this is particularly true for Sundays, in fact weekends in general, but especially Sunday, the traditional Sunday read of the papers before lunch, for example. And finally, being in the know, the predominant need state, and one that's important for most readers right the way throughout the day. For many news brand readers, being in the know is almost like a full-time job. So combined, the news brands fulfill a number of different need states, often at the same time, but their makeup varies by time of day and indeed day of week, as the need for things like up-to-the-minute headlines, knowledge, ritual, and conversation fuel in the mornings gradually gives way to more relaxation or the need to feel uplifted later in the day and at weekends. It's actually a fascinating pattern of consumption, and it can have an impact, of course, on the power of the advertising being consumed at these times. Now, it's no surprise to discover the ability of news brands to stay relevant right across the day has been boosted by access to online or mobile devices. Although print is still by far the predominant means of accessing news brand content, computers have played an important secondary role for a few years now, and increasingly tablets and smartphones are beginning now to boost access significantly more. But this is not about one or the other. More than a third of readers will access their news brands via online or mobile platforms, but more than 2/3 of these readers will also read the print editions of their favourite news brand, also on a regular basis. So this is working together being more, not one thing replacing the other. And when we start looking at this over time, in this case by day of week, then we see some even more interesting patterns. So starting with weekdays, when we look at it by platform, the printed newspaper is the dominant channel, reaching 4 out of 10 adults in the morning, but dropping to just over a quarter during the evening times. And it's a PC or laptop that's the most important of the digital devices, which of course has got a lot to do with availability during the average working day for many people. Mobile devices are relatively marginal at present, even though we're close to mass penetration, but all the signs are that they're increasing rapidly. There's also a diverse range of need states and content needs that become more or less active as the average weekday rolls on. So weekday need states on the whole tend to be more active, or sometimes even proactive, with things like being in the know and fueling conversation, most important right the way across the day in terms of both relative and absolute terms. The morning edition, usually in print, starts off the day with a focus on the biggest stories or a short overview of the headlines. Later on in the day, it becomes more reactive, whatever catches my interest, in order to pass the time or fuel conversation with those around me. Early evening is kind of similar, although the ritual of the evening commute does become more important for many people, as indeed does that end of day unwinding. Before late evening, where opinion, analysis, human interest and entertainment, as the evening unfolds, becomes even more important. So a typical day in the life of a newsbrand reader might look something similar to Brian's, one of our in-depth interviewees. In the morning, it's a variety of sources giving him the latest headlines or quick snippets, mainly, in his case, on his smartphone or tablet. Daytime, though, is about catching up, bits and pieces between work as he moves from place to place. Whereas the evening commute for him is most definitely a ritual, and it's more for the printed paper and more in-depth content. And in the evening, once kids are in bed, it's more about depth of content and mental stimulation. As he says, it's a chance to read full articles in the paper and think more about what they're saying. Saturdays show quite a different picture. Print is still the dominant platform, but is even more evenly spread across the day. All of the platforms, however, see a drop in usage on Saturdays, especially mobile devices. Now, this may have something to do with the sheer number of non-routine commitments and chores people tend to undertake on a Saturday. So for Saturdays, the range of needs to address is also at its strongest from early in the day till after lunch. This is much more about being prepared, engaging in conversations, ritual and routine, or simply passing the time, especially during the busy working or family-focused daytime, where, as I say, news consumption often has to fit in to the gaps between other activities or tasks. As early evening approaches, needs change to become much more relaxation focused, and there's also a sense of randomness on a Saturday, whatever catches my interest, with a stronger focus on exploration and entertainment content. Now, these are very different consumption patterns across the day, and they require very different advertising content, context, and formats. So Saturdays are quite different, especially for, in this case, Naomi, one of our other interviewees. They tend to be more family-orientated, with daytimes devoted to the kids. Mornings are about sharing headlines and generally catching up, although still more relaxed than the equivalent weekday readership. Daytime is about flicking through the updates in between the myriad of activities common to every family. Flicking through the app between times is often all that's possible. So it isn't until early evening that Naomi can, in her words, properly relax and read the paper from cover to cover. As she says, it's my time. Getting the paper makes me sit down, it makes me relax. Although this becomes lighter fare when the kids are in bed. She says it's often the more gossipy stories as she winds down from the day's events. Then we come to Sundays. Again, a different pattern in terms of both platform usership and context. In terms of platforms used, print has a much higher peak on Sunday mornings, the highest level across the whole week. But this extends into daytime, but then falls quite rapidly as daytime becomes evening, becomes nighttime. Regarding digital device usage, computers are down a bit on weekdays, but higher than Saturdays, whereas usage of mobile devices is the highest of the whole week, especially tablets, which sort of seem ideally suited to Sunday readership patterns. In terms of need states and content, Sundays has a unique profile, being much more about depth, relaxation, and browsing. In particular, the more time people have to themselves on Sundays also means there's a greater interest in opinion and analysis, and actually more desire to be informed or mentally stimulated. Although ritual and routine are relatively more important on Sundays, especially in the mornings, readers also appear more open to ideas and more willing to explore or discover content for themselves. This means a more leisurely and open-ended set of needs across the day. And in the evenings, this extends into a desire to be informed, sometimes this feeling of needing to be informed for the coming week, which is an important form of preparation for many, in addition to the need for entertainment and relaxation. So Sundays are typified by Amelia, a 21-year-old medical student. So the Sunday mornings, after a lie-in, obviously, she is a student, it's about going out and buying the paper, becoming almost the official start of the day. Later in the day, it's all about sitting down and spending time with her favourite papers, and very much about sharing the supplements and using the paper as a source of conversation with her housemates. In the evening, when with friends, it's more about the sidebar of shame, the more gossipy, lighter features. But later in the evening, if she has to prepare for a work placement in the coming week, she will read the more serious articles so that, to quote, I can get my head in the game, to do well and feel knowledgeable in front of the people she works with. And this is an often overlooked attraction of newsbrand content for younger adults who need to feel part of that grown-up world and the conversations around it. So it's clear that newsbrand readership is no longer the one-stop experience that it was in the analogue days, but just like most legacy media, technological innovation has actually transformed the patterns of consumption. But the billion-pound question is, what impact does all this have on the advertising? And how can newsbrands be planned better to achieve the key ad objectives? And that differs markedly by platform. According to our sample, the printed paper websites and apps across all the devices seem to elicit quite different views on the role of advertising within them. For example, the printed paper is more closely associated with the traditional functions of newspaper advertising, such as detail or special offers or discounts, but also acting as a useful brand reminder and also making a brand seem important by its association with the newspaper. Digital alternatives offer up a whole range of new perceived advertising benefits, such as interaction. It allows me to interact. Fit. Advertisers are a good fit with the content. Information. It tells me something new. Or sharing. Worth talking about. And when we attempt to show how this relates in a more visual sense, we can see that some of those advertising benefits, offers, trust, bestowing a sense of importance, are common to all, whereas others are more closely related to the individual platforms. So print is more about detailed information, I've just mentioned. The smartphone is more about new information, sharing, and slightly surprisingly, the sense that only big brands advertise here. And the tablet is more about emotional branding, feeling positive about the brand, and encouraging purchase. Meanwhile, the laptop or PC is more closely associated with interactive response. But of course, it's how all these benefits work together to create a whole that is so much stronger than the sum of the parts. That is the real story for newsbrands. Attention, engagement, interaction, promotions, and purchase. All working through the same media channel. Now that's a powerful range of benefits, and I think it's part of the digital dividend for the newsbrand industry. Now, I don't want to labour the point, obviously, but when the whole sample were asked about the role of advertising in each of the main media channels, newsbrands came top for all of the key attributes: relevance, information, trust, engagement, and likelihood of further interaction. There was only one score, only big brands advertise here, where we came second to television. But those advertising strengths, allied to clever media placement and strong creative, can unleash a powerful environment for advertisers, as we saw with the 10 case studies we analysed in Truly Madly Deeply. So, to wrap up, what conclusions can we draw from this detailed analysis of that data? Well, first of all, news brand readership and therefore ad exposure is no longer a one-size-fits-all, one-stop shop. Consumption patterns vary considerably by day, week, platform and context, driven by a wide variety of need states, which news brands address far better than other competitive channels. Print still dominates, but is being enhanced, and in fewer cases replaced by digital media, with mobile devices already beginning to transform the news brand experience to deepen engagement, and let's not forget, provide a whole host of new advertising opportunities, which our recent tablet study demonstrated. And it goes without saying, good media planning can unlock these benefits, and that's a plug for our planning awards, which are being announced in November. In the meantime, here's just a few of the myriad of implications of the data for media planning. One, reach and frequency can be optimized like never before, across platforms as well as across readers' expanding news brand portfolios. The content readers will choose and the platform they choose to read it on at different times of day is strongly governed by their different need states. And each one of those need states will actually create a different type of advertising opportunity, something we're looking to explore in the future. Because this is important if we're to work with media planners and their clients to unlock the power of the emerging news brand advertising opportunity. And I know the team here at Newsworks would love to come in to your organisations and speak about this in more detail over the coming months. But in the meantime, I hope this has been a useful canter through the findings of Never Let Me Go and a useful insight into some of those opportunities. Thank you very much.